Carthy gets stylish. Ray Mears goes napping. Guy meets a mermaid.
We've done some terrible things to the British landscape in the name of progress. Pylons, satellite dishes, mobile phone aerials, happy eaters. But perhaps future generations will come to treasure them as part of our national heritage. After all, it's happened before. A device that was vilified by 18th and 19th century eco-protesters for defacing the countryside weathered the storm, and today nearly 300,000 of them survive in England alone. Styles. Go on, Bruno, go on. The style of Styles is deliciously varied, from nearly too narrow for a man to almost too high for his dog.
Go on. Go on, Bruno.
Different parts of the country have different designs of style. Here in the Dales you'll find stone squeezers, cantilevered step styles and cripple oils, a hole in the wall through which sheep can be driven by the farmer or his dog. Between 1780 and 1820, the land was walled in under the Enclosure Act. But our right to pass from one place to another along traditional routes was preserved, and Styles kept animals in while letting people out. These days, some of the romance has gone. Modern styles are often just a couple of planks bridging a metal fence, a design whose merits remain obscure. It's a terrible bit of design to me. I mean, either you have to go like that, which is terribly uncomfortable, or you go around like this. It's very hard to know which way it's meant to work. I can't quite work it out. Style making isn't one of those rural crafts that's been lovingly preserved for heritage tourists. It's a living thing in a state of constant change. Bill Mitchell, ex-editor of the Dalesman, knows the landscape well.
That's right.
This is a strange one, isn't it? It's like the sort of thing the SAS would put up on some assault course.
Yes, the very modern styles of these, the latest type, and they're pretty cruel actually to walkers. They're the kind of Dales equivalent of the Grand National course for horses. In fact, I doubt whether a horse would get over you, even at a gallop.
Why are there so many different designs of style? Were they made by individual farmers to their own design, or was there a standard that they all worked to?
I think most of them actually came about with the Enclosure Act, and the Enclosure Commissioners just got a map and drew straight lines on it, and some poor waller had got to come along and follow those particular lines. But there were lots of wallers working for something like 3 shillings a rood, which was 7 yards, and of course each waller had got his own individual way of working, and presumably there were little fads came into it with regard to the styles.
Are they just a British thing? Do you get them elsewhere in Europe?
I'd like to think they were a British thing, being very proud British, but...
they're eccentric enough to be, aren't they?
They are, yes. Anyway, my wife and I have just been to Spain. We didn't see one style.
That's it.
So perhaps, in a sense, they are, say, Western Europe anyway.
I think of all the styles in the Dales, though, this one has to be my favourite. It's got an extremely homemade flavour to it, especially round this side. I mean, look at this. A pair of old wellies being used as hinges. The farmers up here were recycling things long before recycling became fashionable. This is known as a welly style. It's authentically northern. I bet you wouldn't find a welly style down south in Oxfordshire, say. But you'd find everything else. In an Oxfordshire meadow sits an installation which might at first glance appear to be an avant-garde sculpture park, but is in fact a state-of-the-art style research and development facility. This cauldron of innovation is the brainchild of style guru Tom Bindos.
But Tom, why styles?
Well, there are an awful lot of them about, and mostly they're pretty dreadful. And I felt it was my job in life to see if I could get them a bit better. This I thought was, you know, the basic idea. Unfortunately, the slats are too wide, so sheep jumped over.
Ditch
so
it, hopeless. So then you moved on to...
Moved on to this, half and half.
Yeah.
This worked okay.
But I can feel a but coming on.
It was still a bit too expensive to be able to be sold sort of commercially.
The world is ruled by accountants, Tom.
That's absolutely right.
There was a James Bond film about styles. You would be Q, wouldn't you?
Well, I'm not sure about that.
So this is the finished version, is it?
Yeah, this is the final version at the moment. But I'm sure there's some more things in the pipeline.
So this is it, you sort of... It's this and... It's very low, isn't it? Are you sure sheep can't get over that?
Well, no. We know that they won't come over because it's a cattle grid.
Ah, well there you are. If I'd had to bet in it, I'd have thought the sheep would have been straight over that. Did you know there's an official British standard for styles which states that they may not be less than 0.9 of a metre or more than 1.05 metres in height, and that they may have one or two steps that may not be more than 300 millimetres apart. We lead the world in style bureaucracy.
Most people think of seaweed as that rotting pile of vegetation you get on the beach, covered in sandhoppers and flies and smelling really bad. But under the water, where the seaweed is still alive, there's much, much more to it than that. On exposed shores like this one, seaweeds can find it really difficult to survive because they're constantly being battered by the waves. So when you get really stormy days, the weeds are ripped away from the rocks and they get washed up in huge mats on the coast. What is it about seaweed that makes you think they're so fascinating?
Well, they have to put up with very many different environments. One minute they're covered by the sea, the next minute they're baked in the sun, not today, I hasten to add, and the next minute they're being rained on. So they have to be terrestrial plants and marine plants all at the same time.
Seaweeds belong to the group known as the algae. You find them thriving in underwater beds, floating on the sea surface or anchored to rocks and piers. Around Britain there are a colossal 800 species. This is sea lettuce,
Spiral rack,
serrated rack,
channeled rack,
egg rack.
and this is one of our commonest kelps. Now this is why we came here, you see. It's just got everything. It's got all the colours, it's got huge diversity, it's teeming with seaweeds. Brilliant. There's all three main colours in this place. There's the brown ones, and if you look carefully, there are two coralline red algae. These deposit calcium carbonate. This is called corallina because it looks a bit like a coral. And this one that looks like pink rock is actually a calcareous seaweed growing over the rock. The sea is a very opaque place for light. It's not at all transparent to light in the way that the air is, so it's a dark environment. And what the seaweeds are doing is maximally using the light that's coming. So they're using a lot of pigments, they're synthesising a lot of pigments to harvest that light and use it in photosynthesis and growth. Look, I found some absolutely amazing things down there. Here's a young kelp. This is just one season's worth of growth.
That's the whole fast?
That's the bit that hangs onto the rock, that's the holdfast. This is the stipe, and then the blade makes all this tissue and it gets beaten off at the ends.
What else you got there?
Ah, well, this one's my favourite, I like this one. This one's called thongweed, and it's a biennial, so this can go to 3 metres. It hasn't got buoyancy bags, but it's making oxygen, and the oxygen isn't diffusing out, and that itself makes it float in the water. So if you look down in the water, you can see this floating on the surface, isn't it? It's the oxygen that's doing the floating. And this one is a very common red. It's called Rhodymenia palmata. A lot of them are called things like digitator and palmata because they're like hands.
So under these brown weeds, you seem to have got different types, smaller reds and greens.
Oh yes, look, this is a real, it's a complicated community. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit like a marine equivalent of a woodland because you have to imagine it when the tide's in. This is not when it's happiest. When the tide's in, then what happens is that these are all floating. They're all vertical. So this is like the canopy in a woodland, and then underneath, this is a kind of shrubby layer. These are red ones. That's the sort of shrub bit, and this is the moss layer. Although the shore looks ever so brown all over when you look at it, if you sort of dig around, look carefully, all sorts of things you can see.
Seaweeds are really good at concentrating certain types of pollution in their tissue, things like heavy metals or radioactive isotopes, and that makes them really useful for marine scientists trying to check out how polluted our coastline is getting. But there are loads of other uses for seaweeds.
Well, they can be used for fertiliser, of course. They're particularly good as a soil conditioner because they hold moisture reasonably well, and it's a way of adding organic material to the soil, which again conditions it. So they're quite good for that. Some people eat them. It's quite an important source of mineral nutrition in some cultures. I'm not terribly sure they're awfully good foodstuffs. What I am sure about is they're very good for this. These are microbiological plates with some bacteria growing on them, and the gel, the support for the bacteria, is the seaweed extract.
Who on earth decided you could use seaweed? I mean, who went out, got his seaweed and made his first agar plate?
They used to be used as gels for making things like blancmanges with, and it's possible that somebody's blancmange was left out overnight and grew a nice culture of bacteria in the morning.
Did you know in Wiltshire, they say that if you have a piece of seaweed with you all the time, you'll never be without friends. So here you go, Brenda.
Thanks, Guy. I think I better take it home with me.
If you want to know more about anything else we've covered in this series of tracks, we've produced a booklet for you. Why not ring us or write to us? It'll be available at the end of the series for £3.50, a cheque payable to BBC Education.
From Snowdon magnificent, Tin. I'm so glad we chose Wales for our holiday.
Yes, it's great. We're so high. How are mountains made, Dad?
Well, there are many processes at play, but they depend on massive forces deep within the earth. 400 million years ago, Snowdon was part of a chain of active volcanoes that fringed an ancient ocean. They were formed when huge slabs or plates in the Earth's crust rubbed across each other. Molten rock and ash were forced upwards and erupted through weak points, piling up on the surface to create mountains.
Wow! Fancy that!
The range they built was the size of the Himalayas. But what you see is the worn-down remains of millions of years of rain, wind and ice. Clouds are gathering. Time we made our way down.
Righto.
Ahoy, Dad!
Oh, it's an echo.
How did that happen?
Ah, well, when you're surrounded by mountains and you shout, sound waves travel away in all directions. They bounce off the hard, rocky surfaces and come back as echoes.
But there's a pause before you hear it.
Sound is a real slow coach compared to light waves. So it takes a moment to hit the rocks and come back to your ear. Now, how about a bite to eat?
Oh, yes, please.
Mountains. Another way they're made. Well, imagine Mum's napkin is the Earth's crust. When two plates meet head-on, it's thrown up into folds, and hey presto, more peaks.
Any ham sandwiches, Dad?
Humans, they give me a right pain in me silk pouch. They look at a spider's web and they say, oh, that's pretty. Pretty? A spider's web's like an SAS survival kit.
But you really want to know what a spider's web's for? Go and ask Paul Selden.
I'm interested in webs because they show a great diversity of different types, different ways in which spiders have exploited their environment.
Paul, where's a good place to go to see a good mixture of spiders' webs?
Well, you can look for spiders' webs anywhere. House, garden, woodland, heathland, anywhere where there are bushes or spaces where spiders can make webs to catch insects flying between.
Does that mean there are a lot of different types of spiders' webs?
Yes, there's over 600 species of spider in Britain, and they all make a specific kind of web. But you can probably boil them down to a handful of main types of spider web. Now this is a technique for showing up webs.
Oh, that works.
You see the way it makes the silk more apparent, rather like developing a photograph. These are sheet webs.
Oh yeah.
You can see it's a horizontal sheet of fibres. The sheet there is a capturing sheet.
Oh look, there's a sort of bullseye one. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. This is a web that's for catching insects flying through this space.
Right.
Sheet webs are not as pleasing to the eye as orb webs. Many arachnologists think that this group of spiders, in fact, are more advanced than the orb web weavers. The reason being that an orb web can be easily generated by a computer program, whereas the sheet web has to often fill in a more irregular space.
And what sort of a web is that?
This is a scaffolding type of web. You see the way that the silk fibres go in lots of different directions. There's no pattern to it at all, or no apparent pattern to us.
And is that just one spider making all that silk?
That's right, just one spider. She's up there in the little retreat.
How does she make all that silk?
It's assembled with proteins. It's put together, it's in a liquid form in the silk glands, and it's then extruded through spinnerets. As it's extruded, it hardens very rapidly.
How strong is a piece of silk like that?
A strand of steel of the same thickness wouldn't be as strong.
You think I just make my web and then sit around twiddling me spinnerets waiting for some fly to blunder in? Well, I'll have you know, I take down my web and rebuild it every day.
Spiders make different types of silk to make the different parts of a web. In this orb web, the frame and the radial lines are made of basic structural silk, but the spiral has little sticky glue droplets on it.
They're for catching things?
For catching things, yes.
How long would it take for her to build that?
About half an hour, probably.
Is that all?
Mm. You can also see that running from the hub is a signal wire, sort of a hotline,
oh, yeah.
which runs up. If you follow that, you'll eventually find where the spider's sitting in a little retreat. If an insect hits the web, it sends out a vibration which she can feel, and then she'll come running down the hotline directly to where the prey item is. This is quite a neat trick. This tuning fork will vibrate at quite high frequency, so it can mimic the vibration of an insect in the spider's web.
So if you touch that, that should... Oh, there she comes, look at that! She came piling down there.
She has to get to that insect pretty quick.
Why?
Because otherwise it can struggle and escape.
What, and rip the web apart?
Tear open the web and get away. Spiders are constantly producing silk. They leave silk behind as a trail, rather like a slug leaves a slimy trail. This is the way that spiders can disperse, can travel using silk. They can let out a stream of silk behind them. Then warm air currents catch that silk, and the spider lets go and is carried off into the atmosphere. It can travel hundreds of miles. Most spiders use silk to wrap their eggs in, to make an egg sac. This is Pisora mirabilis, the nursery web spider, and she wraps her eggs in a sac, a silken sac, but then she builds a tent web around them. She keeps the eggs in there and guards them from predators.
Who makes the most webs? Is it male or female, or is there no difference?
Well, both the young spiders, males and females, both make webs to catch prey in order to feed and to grow. But when the male matures, he often stops making webs and goes off wandering to find the female.
If he's not making webs anymore, how does he eat?
He doesn't. He just concentrates on finding a mate.
So sex becomes the only thing on his mind?
That's right.
Here, mate. Come on, you look a bit achy. You're not off your food, are you?
I see my work as pieces of furniture, but also as sculpture. The story of my driftwood furniture begins in the Atlantic Ocean. Many of the pieces start their voyage in the warm waters of the Caribbean, where they get taken by the Gulf Stream about 4,000 miles across the Atlantic to be left on the beaches of the southwest of Britain. There's been a very strong storm here overnight, and this should be a great place for collecting lots of driftwood. My background is a boat builder. I've worked in the Caribbean for many years before coming back to this country to make furniture. It's an interesting shaped piece of wood, but I can already tell it's too light. It's not solid. Now this looks a lot more useful. It's a piece of a root. The plant would originally be growing this ways up, but it's got a lovely gnarled, twisted end to it. It's not just the action of the sea that shapes the driftwood, it's also the wind and the sand, the abrasive effect of sandblasting that creates the lovely shapes in driftwood. This is an interesting piece of wood here. It shows the effect of wood boring worm, which is called the torpedo worm. You find it a lot in the Caribbean. Occasionally I've found coconuts, sugarcane, mangrove seeds, all kinds of stuff. The sea brings a lot of other materials besides wood, and netting is one of the things that I always try and take from a beach. Whenever possible, I incorporate it into the furniture because it has bright, vibrant colors, which looks good. But I take everything because some of this stuff will trap marine wildlife, so I take it home and I destroy it if I don't use it in the furniture. The exciting thing about making furniture from driftwood is that the wood dictates the final design of the furniture. Conventional carpentry is all about making smooth, geometric pieces of wood. What I like to do is make furniture using pieces of wood that the elements have already sculptured for me. I like to build furniture that's primarily strong and robust, and some people have joked that some of my pieces could sail across the Atlantic.
I'm 40 foot beneath the surface of the Norfolk countryside in a mine that was originally dug about 4,000 years ago. It's an astonishing feat. They've dug straight down through solid chalk, all before the invention of pneumatic drills. This is the tool they used. It's an antler from a red deer. It was used as a pick here in the mine. This was actually left here by one of the miners. Archaeologists reckon that to dig one of these mines, the miners themselves would go through about 150 of these. So what was all the effort about? Well, the answer is this. It's flint. And for 99% of our history, that is the material we use to make our daily tools. And the reason they came so far underground is this seam of flint. It's called floorstone, and it's regarded by many as the finest flint to be found anywhere in the world for making into tools. What's even more amazing to me is that still in the soft chalk you can see marks left by the picks of the miners themselves. And in its heyday, this was the largest flint mine to be found in Britain. It's called Grimes Graves. This crater is one of the infilled mine shafts. And there are about 360 of those on the site. This is pretty much how bits of flint would have come out of the mine. Big nodules of beautiful black Brandon flint. But of course, a piece of flint like this won't make one tool. As long as there are no flaws in it, it's going to give us lots of good, useful pieces of flint. And we're going to reduce it first into some smaller chunks using simple tools like these quartzite hammerstones. Flint is very similar to glass in structure, which means it can be broken in a predictable way. But because it's tougher than glass, it's absolutely ideal for making into nicely shaped, sharp-edged tools. And a piece like that is absolutely perfect for making into an arrowhead. But for that, I'm going to use a slightly different technique. I've put down this piece of hessian so that my flint working won't get muddled up with the archaeological flint working that's here. For the next process, I'm going to need a leather pad like this to protect my hand. And I just roll up one edge of that like this to help make a clamp into which I can put the piece of flint like that. And then I'm going to need an antler tine like this so that I can apply pressure to the edge to break off little flakes. A lot of people are astonished that antler is actually strong enough to break flint. Mind you, I can't help wondering what came first, the flint arrowhead or the antler to make it. Well, I finished shaping the point of the arrowhead, you can see, and I've left the thick part of the flint towards the point. That way it's easy to put into a wooden shaft and the strength of the arrow will remain at the tip where it's needed, close to the striking point. Now, of course, I've got to shape the base part. One of the things that I have trouble with is knowing when to stop. It's quite easy to start out with a big piece of flint and end up with nothing but a pile of dust. There it is, finished. If you've got the eyes to see them, you'll find that the British countryside is very often covered in pieces of flint, showing where people have been working in times gone by. So what were they making with that flint? The perfect scraper, essential for preparing animal skins to make clothing. Leaf-shaped points like this, which are used as knives for butchering or for carving in wood. Or the classic stone axe. In fact, it was this tool that marked the arrival of farming and enabled people to clear the land and raise crops. The amazing thing about flint is it's so easy to work that you can make almost whatever tool you need, just in a couple of minutes.
The first rule of the kissing gate is never try to climb over it, as the incidental collateral undercarriage damage could be horrific.
Yeah. 1947, India had won independence from the British Empire. The stage was set for one family to rule India for almost 40 years. Jawaharlal Nehru, who saw his country split in two.
He knew that partition would entail a pain India had never experienced before.
Indira Gandhi,